Okay, good evening. Good evening. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. There's a few thank yous here. I think I have 9 of them, so they'll be very quick. So first of all, let me say that it's an honor to be the 40th, I've just found out, the 40th speaker here giving the, is that right? The Reynolds lecture, the 40th. So I'm proud to do that. I would also like to thank the Elon Philosophy Department, the Elon College and Arts and Sciences, Creed, who I had a really wonderful time with this morning, discussing very critical ideas, the African American Studies Program, and the Provost for Inclusive Community. That brings me down to 5, 6. I also very much appreciated the masterclass discussion, which was just absolutely phenomenal. 7, tea time was great, although we talked a little too much about Obama. I didn't want to talk about Obama, but that's just me. Is this straight? I guess it's supposed to be like this. Okay. And then let's see, 7 and 8. Dinner, thank you very much for the wonderful dinner. And then 9, last but not least, I also want to thank Professor Ryan Johnson for his persistence in getting me here. And you know, it's quite an interesting risk, I think, for one to get me to speak here. We'll see what happens. And so I really appreciate it. In fact, I was on your comps committee, right? And so, I mean, I think, you know, they do these comprehensives at Duquesne. And I think Ryan probably was one of the most excellent students during that time, one of the most bright and brilliant. So I don't know what you all's plans are for him, but I hope you keep him around here. I think it's very important, especially given his philosophical insights and his pedagogical insights. So glad to have him here. Okay, a quick lay of the land. There's only undergrads here. There's no grad students, right? So who are the undergrads? Just raise your hand if you're undergrads. Okay, good. Any, and faculty, in terms of professors? Okay, neither undergrads nor faculty. Okay, excellent. Okay, good. Okay, let's move on then. Let's see if there's anything else. Good. And I just wanted to say, if there are any terms that I use, because philosophers use this lexicon, please jot it down. If there's a term that I use, a word that I use, I tend to stress those words and look up a little bit. That means that word is important. So if you want to, you know, engage me, please stick around and engage me. Don't let me bullshit you, please. Don't do that. Okay, so let's begin. So the black body through the white gaze on being a black problem. I argue that parrhesia, I've talked a lot about parrhesia, or fearless or courageous speech, is so important when discussing issues regarding race and racism and whiteness in particular. But along with fearless speech, we need fearless or courageous listening, which I see as an openness to have one's assumptions shattered, one's self fissured, to have one's sense of ethical certainty called into question, to have one's sense touched to the point of vertigo, and perhaps even crisis. That's one of those words, crisis. Part of courageous speech in philosophy, so rather I should go back and say, but along with fearless speech, we need fearless or courageous listening, which is then I see as an openness to have one's assumptions shattered, one's self fissured, to have one's sense of ethical certainty called into question. Part of courageous speech in philosophy is to be a troublemaker, a contemporary gadfly. Being a troublemaker involves risk. As for academics, by troublemaker, I don't mean being clever or showing us how good you are at refuting the arguments of your colleagues. More is at stake. Cultural theorist Bell Hooks says that she came to theory because she was hurting, because she was in pain, because she was suffering. How many of us here in this room come to education because we are hurting, because we are in pain, or because we're suffering? I know about risk and the failure of others to listen courageously. For example, I published a piece on Trayvon Martin in the New York Times in a section called The Stone. The article generated over 600 comments. One of them read, quote, "Your stock in trade is white guilt. Your vision of justice is payback. Whitey is the cause of all your problems. You peddle your racial hatred, and that makes you a racist, the very evil you accuse me of. I read your screed on a summer's eve. You write like one. There's a special place in hell for those that lead others astray. Say hi to Teddy Kennedy and Hitler when you get there, end quote. Some of you may know that I also wrote a very controversial article called Dear White America, which generated over 2,000 comments at the Stone, New York Times. For that piece, I received tons of hate mail in my university inbox, voicemail, even snail mail. In fact, police presence was necessary during one of my public talks. A petition was sent out in my support. The American Philosophical Association issued a historic statement on my behalf. White supremacist websites, quote unquote, discussed the piece. And I was invited to appear on Fox News and other social media outlets, all of which I decided to decline. In Dear White America, I wrote what I saw as, or I communicated what I saw as a gift. But this is some of what I received as a response, and I'm not going to go through all of it, it's just too much stuff. But here's one, voice message, quote, "Dear nigger professor, you are a fucking racist. You are a piece of shit, destroying the youth of this country. You are neither African nor American. You are pure 100% nigger. You would never marry outside of your nigger race, that's a fact. You're a fucking smug nigger. You are uneducated with education. You are a fucking animal, just like all black people in the United States of America, including that nigger Kenyan that was born in fucking Kenya that has usurped the White House. Yet, it is called the White House for a reason, because white people made this great country what it is. You fucking nigger," end quote. Inbox message, quote, "Professor Yancy, all of your studies have forced me to examine my self-image and my white racist mind. You clearly state that no matter what I think, I am a racist. Okay, cool. Thank you for clearing that up for me. Now I am forced to say, because you tell me I can say nothing else, fuck you, nigger. As always, the white guy." White supremacist website. And again, there's so many of these. I wouldn't want to bore you with them, right? But, quote, "Cunts like this aren't philosophers. They just hate white people. Simple. He should fuck off to Africa if he doesn't like living in a white country," end quote. My sense is that these individuals failed or refused to be vulnerable, failed to be unsutured, that's a word, failed to tarry, failed to linger, failed to be in crisis, failed to allow my invocation to speak to function as a site of solicitation, a form of troubling. They failed to listen courageously. Frantz Fanon, author of Black Skin, White Mask, says, quote, "I want my voice to be harsh. I don't want it to be beautiful. I don't want it to be pure," end quote. I don't want us here in this room to be seduced by hope. And that might sound counterintuitive, but I'm putting it out there. Because I think hope is too easy. We need something far more dangerous, something far more disconcerting, unnerving, alarming, traumatic, and perhaps a bit haunting, etymologically to frequent. It seems to me that what I'm suggesting here is in fact compatible with parrhesia. So in this talk, I challenge what I see as a certain species of purity in academic discourse. I want the words to do something other than intellectually enlighten, but to affectively disturb you. When it comes to discussing issues regarding race and racism within contexts like this one, we mustn't be like Odysseus, who dared to be adventurous and yet remained safe. We must allow the sirens to sing to us without the safety of a mast, without plugging up our ears with wax. When it comes to intimate and courageous discussions regarding race, how it is lived, and how it is experienced, and how it is avoided, we ought to allow for the strength of what I like to call the aleatoric, the unpredictable spaces of openness to fracture calcified norms and unproductive sedimented practices. We must be daring. We must be vulnerable, which means that we must be open to be wounded. We must be open to be touched. Indeed, we must be open to die. To die to our stubbornness, to die to our denials, to die to our innocence, to die to our epistemological ignorance, to die to our arrogance, to die to our narcissism, to die to our Procrustean assumptions, to die to our fears, to die to our color evasion, to die to our denials, to die to our self-righteousness, to die to all of our philosophical purities, to die to our illusions of safety, to die to all of those tricks that we play to convince ourselves that we are fine, that we are the good ones or the sophisticated ones. Part of what fuels courageous speech, or so I would argue, is also linked to our finitude, our knowledge that we can't stay here forever, that someday all of this will be gone, at least for you and for me. Yet there is something that can be gotten from this sense of finitude. It is that absolute sense of urgency. So with that, I have a little small task for you all. I want you to look at each other. No, I really mean look at somebody. So just look. Come on, you have to look at somebody. You're not looking. Look at somebody. Okay. Good. Okay, that's enough. That's that. But having looked at each other, this is what I want you to take in. Having looked at each other, keep in mind that 100 years from now, we can be pretty sure that none of us in this room will be alive. All of us. I hate to put it to you, but we're going to be dead, gone. Right? The universe will keep expanding. Apparently it's redshifting at the moment, right? I don't know what happens afterwards, so bracket out your faith beliefs, right? Your faith claims. We will be gone. So it seems to me that what we do between birth and the grave is so incredibly vital. Because at some point, as philosopher Cornel West is fond of saying, quote, we will be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms, end quote. West sees this as a very funky place, just as our being born between urine and feces is also a very funky place. Are there any C-section babies here? Just curious. Okay, you guys missed the funk then. Unfortunately, you missed out on it. So this moment of looking at each other is something that I remind my students to do in class. I do it partly because students don't look at each other, not really. They are generally facing the front, facing me. But I want them to feel their finitude and see the face of the other, in this case their fellow classmates, and to see in that face the overpowering inevitability of death, to feel the reality that this face might be gone forever. And I really mean forever. This exercise is not about nihilism. It is not to play jokingly with our human condition, but it's about creating in my students, in us, a sense of shared vulnerability and thereby a sense of shared commonality. My aim is to give them a sense that we are all in this existential journey together, inseparable. White students. My white students are always reminding me that they are not racists. We've made progress, they say. We're not like our parents and grandparents. We live in a post-racial society in which you can be whatever you want to be, if only you try hard enough. We never owned black people. We don't use the N-word. We have plenty of black friends. We love rap music. Hey, rap music, there's a rap that got in there. We love rap music. And we date blacks and Latinos. So when it comes to race and racism, most, if not all of my white students claim to know about the absence of their own racism. They are certain that they are not racists. They are, in short, at peace with who they are. Yet, I would argue that they are at peace within the context of actually perpetuating racism itself. What if, at the end of the day, to be white is to be racist? I'll repeat that. What if, at the end of the day, this day, right, to be white is to be racist? As the so-called good whites, they believe that they are already positioned beyond the muck and mire of contemporary forms of white racism, white privilege and white power. Indeed, there are many of my white students who give the impression that they were born from the head of a god, like Athena from the head of Zeus, fully mature and unscathed by the reality of white racism. The challenge. I challenge the same white students to keep a journal of examples of white racism that they encountered at home, at school, or just within the context of everyday conversations. This, by the way, for those who are interested, is the work that Joe Fagan does. It's called Backstage Racism. Many of them were pretty sure that their journals would be sparse, perhaps even empty. Toward the end of the semester, all of my white students were deeply shocked. In fact, by the end of the semester, they had to question their own sense of certainty about the non-existence of their racism. Some came away deeply troubled by the awareness that white racism is front and center within their families, social groups, and within their dorms. Here are 5 of those recent entries. First white student, quote, "The first day back from spring break, we had a new student move in. When my other floor mates came and noticed this, one ran down the hallway, possibly inebriated, screaming, 'There's a nigger on the floor now, guys, watch your stuff,' end quote. My question is, if you're black, have you ever been looked upon suspiciously as if you were a thief, a criminal, as you were minding your own business? Second white student, quote, one white guy told me his secret thoughts while he was boxing. He said that he always imagined his white girlfriend being banged by some really big black guy, and that this makes him so pissed that he could go all out in boxing, end quote. My question is, if you're a black male, what is it about banging a white girl that puts white guys in a state of frenzy? Dare I say it? Does it have something to do with fear of the big black dick? Third white student, quote, when I was on the elevator, I realized as a black man and woman walked onto the elevator with me, I was clutching my bag close to my body and moved it to the other shoulder away from them. I had no reason to clutch my bag other than the fact that they were black, end quote. My question is, if you're black, have you ever had this experience where white people clutch their bags when they see you approaching? Fourth white student, quote, I went to get my nails done with one of my friends, and while we were picking out our nail polish colors, I asked her what she thought of a dark purple. Jokingly, she said that dark of a nail polish would make my nails look like nigger nails, end quote. My question is, if there exist nigger nails, then what about nigger teeth, or nigger breath, nigger sweat, nigger hair, nigger feet, nigger food, nigger sex, nigger moms, nigger dads, and nigger babies, nigger churches, nigger clothes, nigger love, nigger music, nigger lips, nigger talk, nigger walk, nigger jokes, no good niggers, nigger scent, nigger this, nigger that, nigger politicians, and dare I say, our nigger president? Fifth and last white student, quote, one white girl was talking about why she could not date a black guy, and she mentioned the black hands. She said, when they turn over their hands, that is really gross. They look like gorilla hands, end quote. My question is, why are black people still depicted as monkeys in the 21st century? Clicking sounds. White filmmaker Amy Sands tells the story of how she and her sister would travel from Westchester County to New York City with their grandparents. She says that when they reached black neighborhoods, the windows of their grandparents' car would close and the doors would lock. Quote, until dark faces appear on the street, then the sleek electric windows slid up and sucked close. The automatic locks click down. The dark people are sealed out. We are sealed in. I've experienced those clicks, that peculiar sonic veil that speaks to me and returns my body to me as a black problem. Those clicking sounds are not fictions, not solipsistic nightmares that only I experienced, but shared phenomena grounded upon a shared epistemic community. The clicking sounds are always already accompanied by white nervous gestures and eyes that want to look but are hesitant to do so. The clicks ensure their safety, effectively re-signifying their white bodies as in need of protection vis-a-vis the sight of danger, death, doom, blackness. In fact, the clicks begin to return me to myself as this dangerous beast, a phantom, rendering my body the site of microtomy and volatility. The clicks attempt to seal my identity as a dark savage. The clicking sounds mark me, they inscribe me, rematerializing my presence, as it were, in ways that I know to be untrue, in ways that are not me. Unable to stop the clicking, unable to stop white women from tightening the hole of their purses as I walk by, unable to stop white women from crossing to the other side of the street once they have seen me walking in their direction, unable to stop white men from looking several times over their shoulders as I walk behind them, minding my own business, unable to establish a form of recognition that creates a space of trust or liminality, unable to stop such forms of bodily malediction felt by me. There are times when I want to become their fantasy, to become their specter, their ghost. In the case of the clicks, I want to pull open the car door and shout, surprise! You've just been carjacked by a ghost, a fantasy of your own creation. Now get the fuck out of the car. But of course, this act of agency, this act of protest would simply reinforce the white perception of me as a problem. But what if the clicking sounds could speak? What would they communicate to me? What would they say? Something like this. Click, nigger, click, nigger, click, nigger, click, nigger, click, click, nigger, nigger. The clicking sounds would begin to fragment my existence, cut away at my integrity, depicting me in the form of an essence, a solid type. Click thug, click criminal, click thief, click danger, click hypersexual, click predator, click violent, click wild, click primitive, click angry, click savage, click rapist, click evil, click demon, click Hulk Hogan. It's in reference to Michael Brown. I'm on the receiving side of the clicks, and yet those whites in their cars, through the sheer act of locking their doors, perform their white identities as in need of safety, as in need of protection. The clicks signify multiple layers of their identity. Click white, click white, click white, white, click pure, click innocent, click good, click law-abiding, click vulnerable, click decent, click threatened, click prey, click better than, click epistemically credible, click civilized, click person as such, click human qua human. Yet I want to ask the question, how does it feel to be a white problem? Rethinking the term nigger through the process of reversal, Black literary figure James Baldwin asks, quote, "But if I am not the nigger, and if it is true that your invention reveals you, then who is the nigger?" End quote. Baldwin goes on to say, quote, "I give you your problem back. You're the nigger, baby. It isn't me." End quote. As long as whites see themselves as normative, or even are cited as normative, and I am different qua nigger and qua problem, discourse about my personhood will function as a cover, a mere farce, an empty gesture. Baldwin's point forces us to ask, will the real nigger please stand up? And if one stands, then how does one sustain the weight of that truth? How does one tarry with that truth? Not only are the bodies that initiate the cliques performing their white identities through the cliques, but the cliques themselves install white identities, interpolate, fancy word, or hail white identities, and solidify white identities. The cliques are not isolated, pure auditory data, but markers of social meaning, signifiers of regulated space, forms of disciplining bodies, and part of a racial and racist web of significance that bespeak the sedimentation of racist history and racist iteration. Du Bois argues that for those blacks who have given thought to the situation of black people in America, they will often ask themselves, quote, "What after all am I?" End quote, which is a deep ontological question. Through an uneventful, mundane act of white index fingers locking their car doors, click, click, I want to argue that the color line is drawn. After so many clicks on so many occasions, I am installed as a stranger, as it were, to myself, forcing a peculiar question. Where is my body? And I'm thinking the women maybe in the audience can identify this. What does it mean to be a woman in a male supremacist society with the pornographic male gaze? And what does it mean to own your own body and to pose the question to yourself, where is my body? The question itself marks, or rather makes sense, once the body is theorized, not as a Bruce race extensa, for those who are familiar with Descartes, but as a site of confluent norms, as that whose meaning is a function of a complex interpretive and perceptual framework. I am not a criminal. I am not a problem waiting to attack white people. Hence, their sense of safety is a fabrication. They have created a false dichotomy, an outside, the blacks, as opposed to the inside, the whites. But what if that inside, what if that feeling of safety, that fabricated space, is a construction that is parasitic upon the false construction of the black body as dangerous? If so, then their sense of themselves as safe is purchased at the expense of the possibility for a greater, more robust sense of human community, or Mitsein. They have cut themselves off from the possibility of fellowship, of expanding their identities, of reaping the rewards of being touched by the black other, and thereby shaking the apparent boundaries between, or rather the apparent boundaries of their own white selves. To live a life predicated upon a lie often requires more lies to cover it over. Black bodies then function to conceal the truth that so many whites lead lives that are constructed around a profound deception. Namely, white people need protecting from black people. The need for this lie bespeaks a white self that is on the very precipice of ontological evisceration. Race is lived. My sense is that it is at the level of the lived density of race that so much more work needs to be done, particularly in this space, at this university. It is at this level where the funkiness of racism resides. Indeed, I have known white people who are staunchly against the claim that the concept of race does not cut at the joints of reality. Yet how they live race, how they live their own racism, is unmistakable. I was once being interviewed by a white philosopher for a job opening where the department was looking for someone whose areas of specialization were philosophy of race and African American philosophy. I met with this one white male faculty member for an hour. My assumption was that we would spend time talking about what I would teach, what I desired to teach, my curriculum vitae, and so on. However, he spent the bulk of the time talking about his anti-racism. He also provided a personal narrative incident that was intended to demonstrate this. As I recall, there were no questions about my pedagogy, nor my relatively extensive publication record. But here was a white philosopher who, no doubt, if asked, would have said that the concept of race was scientifically vacuous and had no empirical referent in the natural world, that race is a mere social construction or social category. Yet he felt the need to self-present as pure, as someone who was a good white, one who was above the fray of racism and lived beyond the trappings of race matters. He used my presence, my hour, as a space for white self-confession and self-glorification. There he was, fully visible, entrails revealed, desiring that I spend my time bearing witness to his white purity, so that I could state emphatically and unequivocally that he was one of the good guys. Yet he doth self-praise too much. It was as if he was preparing me for those real white racist others, you know, the bad ones. I was unmoved by the implied dichotomy. He needed my approval, my admiration. My black body, my presence functioned redemptively. In retrospect, I see with greater clarity. This was a situation that must be named. What white narcissism? What white hubris? Look, a white. So here was a case where my presence, my voice, my interior complexity had taken a back seat to his white narcissism. I was neither heard nor in some sense was I hearable. The fact is that whiteness as race continues to exist within the socially and existentially lived space of everyday experiences. The reality of race then, though not a natural kind, is purchased within the framework of a social ontology that recognizes the very serious persistence and implications of race beyond what has been called its ontological vacuity. My work theorizes and understands black embodiment within the context of white everyday power or hegemony. Some have argued that I have managed to telescope the black body within the context of African American philosophy. Within this context, the power of the white gaze, which is a structured way of seeing, is always already mediated by certain norms and values. Interpolated, the black body is that which is epistemologically and ontologically given. This is a situation that involves the collapse of ontology and epistemology into each other without much slippage. What it, the black body, is, and what it is known as, is constructed through gazes, bodily gestures, visual images, various representations and discursive practices that have overdetermined its being and constructed it as a denigrated thing. The use of thing here is not just simply a tropological reference. Think of the philosopher Hegel. How many of you guys heard of Hegel? Good. Think of Hegel. Hegel, who thought that black people had no Geist, they possess no spirit. Hegel says, quote, nothing consonant with humanity is to be found in his, the Negro's, character, end quote. For Hegel, the Negro is an animal man or an animal person, sensuous and without subjectivity, self-consciousness, and the capacity of representation. So this is why the Negro is unable to represent in an abstract sense that human flesh is a body that is capable of psychological associations and not simply an object of the senses or something to be eaten. Or think of the philosopher Immanuel Kant. You guys have heard of Kant, right? Who held that to be black from head to toe is clear proof that what a black person says is stupid. So in other words, if Kant was in the audience and they would cover me with a drape or something, right? And I said something quite profound, right? Without Kant seeing me, he would say, oh my God, that is just absolutely brilliant, right? And then they'd raise the curtain, he'd see that I was black from head to toe, and he'd say, oh shit. Clearly what he said was stupid, right? And you can see where this is going, right? And keep in mind that this is the same Immanuel Kant, the brilliant one of the three critiques, who also believed that all blacks were born white. So if you're black, you were born white as a baby, with the exception of a little black ring around your navel and your genitalia. Right? That's Immanuel Kant, who also believed, by the way, that black people talk too much and they had to be beaten away with a cane. Right? And this is the Immanuel Kant who apparently never left Königsberg. Right? So in short, then, the black body has endured a process of both inscription and description, both terms intimately linked. Or think of the lynched black body, a problem in need of discipline, and think here of the concept of overkill. For example, in 1934, 23-year-old Claude Neal was accused of killing a white woman, and it is said that a confession was wrung out of him, meaning that it was forced, twisted, and strained out of him. Well, Neal was kept in a jail cell. He was then dragged out by white men, at which point they cut off his penis. And they took his penis and they stuffed it in his mouth. And while it was in his mouth, he was forced to say that I like it. Just imagine that. Then they cut off his testicles, and they too were stuffed into his mouth. And he was forced to say that he liked those. Now and then, a finger or toe would be cut off. They tied a noose around his neck so tightly that he would lose consciousness, and then they'd unloosen it and begin the torturing all over again. Right? Eventually, he was killed. His body was dragged to a nearby town where roughly 7,000 white people waited. Even little white children with little sharpened sticks got to stab at the black body. Right? And keep in mind that this is all about the spectacle, a side of the spectacle, a side of the homoerotic, and also the side of capitalism in terms of consumption. So it was not unusual at a lynching for white people to write their relatives and write on a postcard that you missed the barbecue. Or think of 21-year-old black female Mary Turner. We don't hear much about black females who were lynched. Mary Turner was 8 months pregnant, and she said that she would identify those whites who lynched her innocent husband. Because you have to remember, it wasn't the body as such that was to blame. It was really white bloodlust. Right? All that whites had to hear was the story of a black man having done X, whatever that happened to have been, right? And then any black body would have been lynched. Well, she made the mistake, and I say that, made the mistake of saying that she would identify every white man there. So what they did to her is they tied her up by her ankles. Remember, she's 8 months pregnant. They threw motor oil on her body and gasoline, and they set her afire, right? At which point, as she's burning, a white man walks over with a big butcher's knife and cuts into her belly, at which point the infant falls out, hits the ground, makes one sound, at which point he goes over and crushes its delicate head, right? Crushes it. At which point, afterward, it's said that they shot her body with many holes. And when they say many, it was like not 30, 40, 50, hundreds of times, right? She was shot. Or think of the rape of enslaved black women's bodies that were said to be always already sexually available, indeed hypersexual essences, things, and thereby could not be raped. Such bodies, or what I call the other of the second sex, were metaphorically open, always desiring to be taken. Black women's bodies might be said to be holes without bottoms, or perhaps just bottoms with holes. And there's so many contemporary examples that I could give, but I'm going back a bit. And if 1934 is too remote to engender a sense of the gravity of the problem of how black people are treated, think of 1999 in New York when black male Amadou Diallo, a thing like essence, always already on the brink of violence, was shot at 41 times by white police officers and hit with 19 bullets as he reached for and grabbed his, and I left that blank for you guys to fill it in, his wallet, right? And according to ballistics, he even had holes in his feet. So as he was falling backward, he was still being shot. Our question here today is, what is it about this movement when it comes to a black body wallet that signifies gun? What's going on there? Or think of black male Abner Louima in 1997, who was handcuffed by white police officers, where a white police officer ran from the back and took a stick and pushed it up his rectum, so far damaging his insides, and then allegedly pushed it into his mouth, breaking out teeth, and ran around the police station saying, "This is how you break a man in." Right? So it's a black male in handcuffs, right, with this phallic object pushed up into him so far that it damaged his stomach. And the excuse, by the way, that the police created is that Abner Louima had abnormal sex before he got there. Or think of Susan Smith, the white woman who in 1994 drowned her children and blamed it on a black man. Or think of Charles Stewart, a man who in 1989 shot his pregnant wife in the head and shot himself in the abdomen and then blamed it on a black man. Or think of white state authority and arrogance spilling from the lips of the white police officer who asked Sandra Bland, quote, "You mind putting out your cigarette, please, if you don't mind?" End quote. Bland, laying claim to her spatiality and embodied freedom within her own car, says, quote, "I'm in my car, why do I have to put out my cigarette?" End quote. It is at this point that the white police officer says, quote, "Well, you got to step out now," end quote. When Bland refuses, the officer says, "I'm going to drag you out of here," end quote, and shortly thereafter screaming as he pointed his taser at her, quote, "I will light you up," end quote. Or think of Bill Bennett, former Secretary of Education under Reagan, and his remark where he said, quote, "I do know that it's true that if you wanted to reduce crime, you could, if that were your sole purpose, you could abort every black baby in this country and your crime rate would go down," end quote. He then goes on to say how impossible, ridiculous, and morally reprehensible this would be, but yet true. So while he clearly disagrees with the statistic that crime is down because abortion is up, if you guys are familiar with this argument in terms of Freakonomics, right? He has no problem using the epistemic operator true vis-a-vis the apparent necessary connection between aborting black babies and the decrease in the crime rate. Note that he says, "I do know." In short, Bennett knows that it is true that the category of blacks who are still in the womb will necessarily commit crimes, and he knows this prior to their birth. Hence, in the name of a future that we cannot possibly predict, little Jamal, let us say, has already committed a crime. His body is already against the law, because Bennett knows that it is true that if he is aborted, our crime rate will in fact go down. So here's a case where the black fetus is always already against the law, is the very essence of criminality prior to its birth. This is a case where 3 strikes and you're out, right? Rather, this is a case where it's not the case that 3 strikes and you're out, or even that 1 strike and you're out. Presumably, all that is required is for one to be out, is to be a black. That is a thing, a problem. At the moment of conception, then, black life is already out. So here is a case where to be is the problem, and where the only solution is death. Keep in mind that the etymology of the term problem means to throw forward. Hence, a black fetus is already thrown in front of itself, functioning as an obstacle to its own emergence in the world. Or what about being a black philosopher within a country and within academic contexts where black intelligence is denied, where, for an example, I stand before you, become an oxymoron as a black philosopher, only mimicking speech? You guys have heard of David Hume? David Hume said of Negroes, of black folk, that they are mere parrots, that we're tropical birds, right? This natural parroting capacity and other presumptive characteristics, according to Hume, would not be the case if nature had not made an original distinction between different breeds of men. And for those who are interested in Hume, it's a fundamental critique there of his theory of causality. Worse off than the poet's critique by Plato, blacks even lack inspiration. In other words, black people, we say intelligent things, but we don't comprehend what it is that we say. So if I were to say something like, a man who has knowledge of something, that is to say of something that exists. For what does not exist is nothing. Thus knowledge is infallible since it's logically impossible to be mistaken, whereas opinions can be mistaken because opinions have to do with what both is and is not. Or what if I said, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. All of our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. Leaving at this point, life is a tale told by an idiot. No, I'm just kidding. I just want to hear this Shakespearean thing. Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis noble in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Well, what does all that mean? To hell if I know. Okay. No fucking idea. But there I am, right? Just parroting. Or think here of philosopher Cornel West, who was stopped by a white police officer who accused him of trafficking cocaine. He told him that he was a professor of religion. And the officer said, quote, "Yeah, and I'm the flying nun. Let's go, nigger," end quote. If you've seen The Flying Nun, played by Sally Field, you know that it was a fantasy about a nun who could fly, right? On this score, the white police officer is saying of West that he, like the flying nun, is a fantasy. After all, how can a black body be a professor of religion or a philosopher? West might be said to be something fit for teratology. Teratology is a study of monsters, perhaps Frankenstein's monster, a monstrous problem. Given that the construction of the black body is linked to the socio-ideological construction of the white body, it is important to turn or return the gaze upon the constitutional acts of white racist intentional consciousness. To theorize whiteness in terms of its self-conscious claims to supremacy, however, would leave untheorized or under-theorized the various ways in which whiteness expresses itself in a very subtle and insidious way. Unlike black bodies physically confiscated from Africa, black bodies are confiscated within social spaces of meaning. And again, I want women to think about this, the ways in which the meaning of your bodies are confiscated within social spaces. So these social spaces are constructions. They're social spaces of transversal interaction that are buttressed by what I like to call a racist value-laden episteme. It is a peculiar experience to have one's body confiscated without physically being placed in chains. So this elevator scenario that I'm about to give you is a case of having my body confiscated. So the elevator scenario, an encounter in black and white. Well-dressed, I enter an elevator where a white woman waits to reach her floor. She sees my black body, though not the same one that I have seen reflected back to me from the mirror on any number of occasions. She sees a black body, as Robert Gooding Williams might say, quote, supersaturated with meaning, as they, black bodies, have been relentlessly subjected to negative characterization by newspapers, newscasters, popular film, television programming, public officials, policy pundits, and other agents of representation, end quote. Her body language signifies, look, the black. On this score, though short of a performative locution, her body language functions as an insult. Over and above my body, over and above the way my body is clothed, regardless of the fact that I wear a suit and tie, she sees a criminal. Indeed, she does not really see me. Rather, phenomenologically, she might be said to see a black, fleeting expanse, a peripherally glimpsed, vague presence of something dark, forbidden, and dreadful. Despite what I think about myself, how I am for myself, her perspective, her third-person account, seeps into my consciousness. I catch a glimpse of myself, though, through her eyes, and just for that moment, I experience some form of double consciousness. But what I see does not shatter my identity or unglue my sense of moral decency. After all, from the perspective of white hegemony, hers is deemed the only real point of view. One might say that the white woman's consciousness of the meaning of my black body coincides with the meaning of the black body as such, and that from her perspective, there is no meaning, bless you, that the black body possesses that is foreign to her. That is, a meaning that is capable of enlarging her field of consciousness or seeing. As Patricia Williams might say, I occupy, quote, a space of the entirely judged, end quote. When she sees me, the symbolic order of blackness as evil is collapsed. I am evil. My blackness is the stimulus that triggers her response. The Negro, as Fanon notes, quote, is a phobogenic object, a stimulus to anxiety, end quote. Her gaze is, as Judith Butler says, quote, not a simple seeing, an act of direct perception, but the racial production of the visible, the workings of racial constraints on it, what it means to see in the first place, end quote. It's not this time that I usually give a handout, but I didn't do a handout this time, so I'm just going to keep moving. As black, I am the looked at. As white, she is the bearer of the white look. But note that I have not given my consent to have my body transformed or to have it reshaped and thrown back to me as something I'm supposed to own, as a meaning I'm supposed to accept. But then again, who does? She clutches her purse, eagerly anticipating the arrival of her floor, knowing that this black predator will soon strike. As she clutches her purse, I am reminded of the sounds of whites locking their car doors as they catch a glimpse of my black body as I walk by. Click, click. She fears that a direct look might incite the anger of the black predator. She fakes a smile. By her smile, she hopes to elicit a spark of decency from me, but I don't return the smile. I fear that it might be interpreted as a gesture of sexual advance. After all, within the social space of the elevator, which has become a hermeneutic transactional space within which all of my intended meanings get falsified, as when, for an example, women say no and we hear yes, it is as if I am no longer in charge of what I mean or intend. What she sees or what she hears is governed by a racist epistemology of certitude that places me under erasure. Her alleged literacy regarding the semiotics of my black body is actually an instance of profound illiteracy. Her gaze upon my black body might be said to function like a camera obscura, Her gaze consists of a racist socio-epistemic aperture, as it were, through which the white light of truth casts an inverted, distorted image. It is through her gaze that I become hyper-vigilant of my own embodied spatiality. On previous occasions, particularly when alone, in an elevator, I have moved my body within that space of the elevator in a non-calculative fashion, paying no particular attention to my bodily comportment, the movement of my hands, my eyes, the position of my feet. On such occasions, my being in, for those who know Heidegger, my being in the space of the elevator is familiar. My bodily movements, my stance, are indicative of what it means to inhabit a space of familiarity. But now it is becoming hard to breathe. What if I shouted, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe? What would she say? The movement away from the familiar is what is also affected vis-a-vis the white woman's gaze. My movements become and remain stilted. I dare not move suddenly. The apparent racial neutrality of the space within the elevator, when she's standing alone, has become one filled with race all of a sudden. I feel trapped. I no longer feel bodily expansiveness within the elevator, but constrained. I now begin to calculate, paying almost neurotic attention to the proxemic positioning of my body, making sure that this black object, this black thing, what now feels like an appendage, a weight, is not too close, not too tall, not too threatening. So I genuflect, but only slightly, a movement that feels like an act of worship. Notice that she need not speak a word to render my body captive. She need not scream, rape. She need not call me nigger. Indeed, it is not a necessary requirement that she hates me in order for her to script my body in the negative ways that she does. White America has seen to that. So my purpose is given to me in advance. So it's a weird feeling to have one's identity meet one in advance of one's own appearance. I'm often reminded of my purpose, my interracial teleology, that is my problematic identity, through popular culture. I sit, for an example, in movie theaters, waiting for me to appear on the screen, waiting to see my body appear before me. For an example, in the movie White Chicks, 2004, I am the character Latrell Spencer, who reminds white women, quote, you know what they say when you go black, and you guys finish that. But in this case, he says, you know what they say when you go black, you're going to need a wheelchair. End quote. Just drink that in. In this case, I have such a large dick that I am capable of rendering white women immobile. In other words, I am the sadistic black male body in search of masochistic white female bodies. I also recently saw myself in the movie The Heartbreak Kid, 2007, where a white woman who plays white actor Ben Stiller's wife pleads with him while having sex. She shouts, quote, fuck me like a black guy, end quote. You guys have to see that movie. One, of course, feels sorry for Stiller's character, as he really tries, with pronounced gyrations, to fuck her like a black guy. But he does so to no avail. After all, according to the racist logic, he is white. And in Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, 1999, I was the black man who entered a closet with a white woman who was blind. After having sex with her, not only does she miraculously gain sight, but she says, quote, you're black? I knew it, end quote. So here, the black male dick reveals its multiple talents. Not only is it capable of temporarily crippling white women and confining them to wheelchairs, while of course rendering extreme pleasure, but the black dick is also capable of healing the blind. The white gaze has fixed me, like looking into Medusa's eyes. I've become made into stone, stiff, ever erect. It is as if Viagra runs naturally through my veins. In fact, I've become a phantasm, so fictive has the black body become that its very material presence has become superfluous. There are times when the black body is not even needed to trigger the right response. All that is needed is the imago, which is the image. Fanon observed, quote, a white prostitute told me that in her early days, the mere thought of going to bed with a Negro brought on an orgasm, end quote. The mere thought. While actual black bodies suffered during the spectacle of lynchings, one wonders to what extent the black body as phantasmatic object was the fulcrum around which the spectacle was animated. What then am I to do? Within this elevator, this racially saturated field of visibility, I have somehow become this predator stereotype from which it appears hopeless to escape. The white woman thinks that her act of seeing me is an act of knowing what I am, of knowing what I will do next. Like Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, Renisha McBride, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Jordan Davis, Eric Harris, and Sandra Bland, I arrived too early on the scene. I am already a problem to be reckoned with. Conclusion. What am I to do within this racially charged space? How do I de-problematize my body within the elevator? Do I enact a disruptive, counter-white racist performance? If so, what would that look like? I could always turn around and state contemptuously, frankly, I don't give a damn about your kind. But this would only confirm her fears of the mythical, raging, angry black male. That is, I'm still a problem. I could also attempt to trigger a sense of shame. Miss, I assure you that I am not interested in your trashy possessions, and I especially have no desire to humiliate you through the violence of rape, nor are my sexual desires outside of my control. Thank you very much. In this case, I position my moral subjectivity in such a way that she relationally comes to take up the position of a particular kind of subject, one who feels shame. In other words, this shame is a constituted effect produced through the effective positioning of myself as a moral actor within this dyad. Then again, she could be thinking, you uppity nigger, just who do you think you're talking to? Then again, what if I have indeed positioned her to feel shame? What if she leaves the elevator feeling bad about what she did, feeling bad about her whiteness? But what happens when this feeling gets quickly transformed into a positive sense of self-recovery? What if she now takes that discovery to indicate a form of transcendence beyond all things racist? She becomes no longer concerned about black pain and suffering, or my pain and suffering, but her pain, her guilt, her need to feel good, her need to feel pure and ethical. In short, she fails to tarry with black pain and suffering, and she also fails to tarry with the complexity of her own whiteness. What appeared to be a movement toward undoing whiteness is reinscribed as a place for precisely doing whiteness. And what if the elevator broke down for 6 hours? Would this create a space for her death, or perhaps her salvation? Or perhaps this is a distinction without a difference? What if she got to know me differently during those 6 hours? What if her perceptual practices began to crack, though slightly? Is this not the beginning of a bridge? Perhaps we need more spaces where the spaces that we inhabit break down, like the elevator, spaces where we get to dwell near each other, where you, as white, get to see that you are the problem. How do we here within this space, this room, experience breakdown? Perhaps in that brief period on the elevator along with me, she will become unsutured, or perhaps an inspiration to be unsutured, and recognize how we are both part of the same racialized and social integument of North America. Perhaps she will recognize my being as precarious, which denotes dependency, a form of asking, an entreaty, a form of prayer, of supplication. So if what I am ontologically is not a problem, but a site of asking, then what is required is a response. Think of the unfolding of the potential of something profoundly beautiful and yet terrifying had George Zimmerman become unsutured vis-a-vis Trayvon Martin's body. A body that is an asking. Will you help me? Will you take care of me as I walk in this unfamiliar space? Will you support me as I walk here with effortless grace? Can you see my black body as one that matters? Then again, what happens when the elevator starts up again? The white woman returns to a world in which white skin privilege is systemic, where her white identity contends to be complicit with white norms, where other whites come to live their lives effortlessly when it comes to being white, a world in which they continue to find their way, where they continue to live lives predicated upon lies, where they retain their racism, where it remains unmarked, where I remain a problem through what Barbara Applebaum calls white ways of being. What if whites don't really know the extent of their own racism? What if they can't? What are the ethical implications of this? What if their racism is embedded within structures of racism that hold them prisoner, or within psychologically opaque forms of racist constitution? What if there is no escape from white racism? What does this mean? What does it mean for me, or perhaps you? Is my existence doomed as whites continue to take time to get their shit together? Is it Sisyphus-like, or is it a Sisyphus-like project? Whites continue to make mistakes and continue to falter in the face of embedded historical racism and opaque racism. Tomorrow, a black body will be murdered as it innocently reaches to play with a toy gun, Tamir Rice, as it runs and is shot in the back, Walter Scott, as it asks for help, Renisha McBride, as it listens to music, Jordan Davis, as it carries Skittles, Trayvon Martin. The sheer weight of this reality mocks the patience of theory. For the most part, white people are not in crisis vis-a-vis their whiteness. They are under constant therapeutic reprieve, assured that there is nothing problematic about whiteness, about their white selves. They believe that they are not racists. Again, what if to be white in America is to be a racist? And what if to be black in America is to be a problem? We need a place where we get to dwell near and where white people get to be in crisis, a fundamental turning point, a site of uncertainty, off-centeredness, unsuturing, and within spaces too close to hide, at least not for too long. In double conclusion, then, perhaps there is no place called white innocence vis-a-vis the black body as a problem. And if this is so, what are the deeper ethical implications for whiteness and what is required? In fact, what is required of you? Thank you. Thanks. There's a fly here that really likes this lecture too. He keeps hanging around. One thing can I say really quickly? One thing I want to say about when I was talking about the elevator, it's on the handout, but I don't have the handout, is to define whiteness as the whiteness as a transcendental norm. Let me say something quickly about that. To say that whiteness is the transcendental norm, and I believe that it's in this space right now, is to say that whiteness goes unmarked. I mean, everybody knows what BET is. What is that? But what is wet? Or what is white? White entertainment television, right? Nobody calls it that, right? So whiteness as a transcendental norm means that whites, those who are not white, are deviant, different, raced, marked, right? Whiteness is non-deviant, normative, unmarked, unraced, right? And so I'm arguing that in this elevator, whiteness as the transcendental norm is operating. And also operating within the elevator, and then I'll entertain some questions, is the idea of the white gaze. And I've done a lot of theorizing about the white gaze, and two of its properties. Three. One is for it to be Procrustean, going back to Procrustean. And I'll just ask, does anybody know where the term Procrustean comes from? It comes from Procrustes, the mythological figure, who had this bed, and if you were too long, he would put you in the bed and he would lop off your limbs to make you fit into his bed. And if you were too short, he would stretch you to fit into his bed. Hence, whiteness, the white gaze, is Procrustean. It wants to fit you, right? It's also hegemonic, and it's also mythomaniacal. And I'm going to end on this point. It's also mythomaniacal. So what I argue is that in the elevator, the white woman doesn't recognize what she's doing to my body through her gaze, right? And I'll give you a quick example of this and how it works. Imagine me writing a letter to myself saying, "Dear Dr. Yancy, I love you so much. You smell good. You look good. Oh my God. I just can't wait to get you tonight. Oh my God. Signed, Dr. Yancy." Right? And I put it in an envelope, right? Put my address on it, walk out, and mail it to myself. And I wait with all the attendant experiences of, oh my God, this letter's coming. Yeah. And the letter comes and I open it and it's like, oh my God. And I read it. He loves me. Just, oh my God. Right? That's the mythomaniacal, right? This is how it works. I'm going to ask you a question. Why do you think black people ran away from plantations? Just give me a guess. Why did black people flee plantations? At least, right? They certainly hate it, right? Well, black people would flee from plantations and white people didn't get it. So why the hell are black people fleeing? Pigs don't flee, cows don't flee, and blacks are chattel, so what the hell's going on? So they went to this guy, Samuel Cartwright, who's a doctor, and he says, okay, that's an interesting problem. I think I figured it out, right? He said that black people suffer from what he called drapetomania. And drapetomania is the disease of running away from plantations, right? And black people would also break stuff. So black people would engage in, when they couldn't completely create a moment of revolution, they'd break stuff like plants and, tools. They'd engage in what's called micro acts of resistance, what's called infrared or infrapolitics, right? And they asked Samuel Cartwright about this and said, well, look, cows don't break tools, but black people are breaking tools. What's going on? So he said, okay, let me give some thought. Oh, okay, I got it. They are suffering from what we're going to call dysesthesia ethiopica. And what is that? It is the disease of breaking shit, right? So what you've got here then, right, what's interesting about this, in political theory, it's called ideology. In existential theory, it's called black faith. Why I'm calling it mythomaniacal. In epistemology, it's called epistemology of ignorance. But it's this way of engaging in a objectification mistake whereby what is social is deemed natural. So it's the case that the black body is naturally endowed with not endowed, but suffers from these diseases, right? So that you can then objectify your own activity in such a way that your activity becomes alien to you, right? So you had nothing to do with that. So I'm arguing that in the elevator, the white woman is doing a similar sort of thing, right? So let's open it up to some interesting questions.